Angels, the Champ Strider here, and today it's all about the best weapons in Chivalry, and some things have changed since I last did one of these with weapon nerfs and buffs, so I figured it's time to revisit my top 5 weapons in Chivalry list, and despite what the spreadsheet gamers will say, there's a bit of subjectivity to weapon preferences. What's great about Shiv is different players have different playstyles, so they'll gravitate towards different weapons. So to keep an open mind and show a bit of the subjectivity here, I enlisted 2 fellow content creators, the author of the Tenets of Chivalry, Montessor, and fellow Team Objective pub stomper Disasterosaurus to make their top 5 weapon lists. Also, we'll go over each one of their lists before hopping into a more extended version of mine. Remember, the only way to become an angel is by subscribing. So now let's start with the master duelist Montessor, one of the most knowledgeable and mechanically strong players in the game. Now, Monty specializes in dueling in first person, and it seems he has very similar weapon preferences as me. I think I even ran most of these last night on stream, but his top 5 would be the two-handed hammer, the one-handed sword, the great sword, the messer, and lastly ending with my favorite, the long sword. Now, Disasterosaurus mostly plays team objective like me, however, she plays in third person, and she's just a complete pub-stomping beast, and if you watch her play, she's not only extremely mechanically strong, but she's very intelligent about picking her engagements, a skill that I myself am still working on. Now, she seems to value some different weapon attributes than myself, however, everything she picks, of course, is extremely viable. Her list starts with the Messer, the Danax, the great sword, the halberd, and in the top spot, the spear. Now, before we get to my list, let me just toss out a little spoiler. Of the 3 elite players, including myself, giving lists here, not one included the best weapon in the game, the polehammer. So sorry, polehammer supremacy, your lists are still suspect. At number 5, we have what I like to call the shitter stomper, and that's the Highland Sword. The Highland Sword is strong for a few reasons. First, it's hit super hard, and second, it has an insanely long reach. This allows players to use that kind of dodge, swing, repeat playstyle, and also to just rake your swing through a huge radius of enemies. The Highlander is king right now of hopping into a bridge or a choke point fight and killing 5 players with one heavy swing. It's also really punishing to fight against for players who hold block often, as the heavy swings do a massive amount of stamina damage. That being said, the Highlander is very slow and will lose initiative, and it's just not fluid to fight with. I highly prefer the next weapon on my list, which gives you a lot of what the Highland does, but it's way more fluid. That weapon at number 4 is the Great Sword, and I use this weapon all the time. It might wind up being my most used weapon over the last few months, and the Great Sword has that combination of relatively hard hitting with a good reach, which makes it great for abusing distance and fighting groups of enemies. Why I prefer the Great Sword to the Highland is it's much more fluid than the Highland, meaning you can chain attacks or combos together really nicely without as much of a risk of losing initiative. And before we get to number 3, I've been telling anyone who will listen for months now, don't sleep on the Great Sword stab. You can aim it off your enemy's character model's shoulder and pull it back on them at the last second. It drags so nicely. I get around people's blocks all the time with this. With weapon number 3, we're sending our opponents to Valhalla, and that is with the Danax. The Danax, it's super interesting weapon because it kind of combines one-handed speed with two-handed power. So not only is it fast and hard-hitting, it also cleaves, so you can swing it through multiple enemies really nice. And what we don't often talk about with the Danax is that you can chain attacks together with the Danes at a very fast pace to really keep your opponents on their back foot. And for good measure, you can also chuck it because the Danax does insane throw damage. Now, the next 2 weapons I consider interchangeable, but at number 2, we have the Messer. I tout this weapon as kind of the jack-of-all-trades weapon in Chivalry. It might not be the best at any one thing, but it's serviceable to good at almost everything. It has the reach to swing through multiple enemies. It does good damage, especially with those overheads, which absolutely slap, and it's also a tad faster than your greatsword. Having all options open means your opponents, they can never predict what you're going to do. And don't sleep on the Messer stab, even though it doesn't do that much damage. The reach it's kind of deceivingly long. At number 1, no surprises here, but the longsword is still king. It might not come out at the top of the spreadsheets, but there's a reason it's still the most used weapon in competitive play. The longsword, it's just fluid. You can chain attacks together nicely, you can slow it down with drags, and most importantly, it has the best regular stab in the game. This is still my go-to sweaty play weapon or comfort weapon. Its animations, they can be really hard to read and react to, especially when mixing in excels. I recommend everyone to take the time to use this weapon. It might be a bit jarring at first with weak slashes, but it is just damn good. Alright boys, that brings us to the end of our list of the top 5 weapons in Chivalry. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I'm going to transition into some gameplay clips now. Be sure to check me out on the next Twitch stream. Champ out. That was beautiful. Don't shoot me! Don't take it away, baby. That was an NPC peasant who attacked me. I just took so much friendly damage. Get him out of here. My God almighty, boys, dude. There's one thing Khan needs to do is turn her off. Like, he gotta be low on stamina. I don't think
Critical instruments are almost completely destroyed. Now the